I was standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee when I watched Helen Pritchard's SUV slide across the ice like a hockey puck and crash straight through my brand new fence. The sound of splintering would cut through the howling wind of the snowstorm, and I knew before I even set down my mug that this was going to be a nightmare. My name is Nathan Miller, and I had lived in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Boulder, Colorado, for exactly 8 months. The fence that Helen just destroyed had cost me $4,000 to install just 3 months ago. It was a beautiful 6-foot privacy fence made from cedar, professionally installed with concrete footings, and it perfectly bordered my backyard against the common area that ran along the creek. I had gotten approval from the city, checked all my property lines, and even had the fence set back an extra foot from my actual property line, just to be absolutely certain there would be no issues. The snowstorm had started the night before, dumping about 14 inches on us by morning with no signs of letting up. I had called into work, knowing the roads would be treacherous, and settled in for a snow day. I was a software engineer for a tech company downtown, and they were pretty flexible about remote work anyway. My wife Jessica was visiting her parents in Arizona with our 2 kids for the winter break, so I had the house to myself. I pulled on my boots and coat and headed outside into the blizzard. Helen was already out of her vehicle, standing in front of the wreckage with her phone pressed to her ear. She was in her mid-50s, with that particular haircut that seemed mandatory for women in her position, short and severely angled. She wore an expensive-looking parka and designer snow boots that probably cost more than my entire winter wardrobe. "Helen," I called out, trudging through the snow. "Are you okay?" She held up one finger at me, continuing her phone conversation. I could hear her sharp voice even over the wind. "Yes, I understand, but I need someone out here now. This is completely unacceptable. The HOA pays good money for snow removal services." I stood there in the freezing cold, watching my fence lean at a drunken angle, half of it completely flattened under her Mercedes SUV. The front end of her vehicle had sustained significant damage too. The bumper crumpled and the hood buckled slightly. At least, she had been going slow enough that the airbags had not deployed. Finally, she ended her call and turned to me, but instead of apologizing or asking if we should exchange insurance information, she pointed at the remains of my fence. "Nathan, this fence is a hazard. I have been meaning to talk to you about it for months now." I blinked snow out of my eyes. "Helen, you just crashed into my fence. Are you hurt? Do you need me to call anyone?" "I am perfectly fine," she snapped. "But this fence is the problem. It is too close to the common area and it creates a blind spot." I could not see properly while navigating around the curve, and this fence jumped right out at me. I felt my jaw tighten. "The fence jumped out at you. You know what I mean. It is a visibility issue. I am going to have to file an incident report with the HOA, and we will need to discuss the removal of this fence entirely." "Removal? Helen, you crashed into my fence. Your insurance needs to pay for the repairs." She crossed her arms, seemingly oblivious to the snow accumulating on her shoulders. "We will see what the HOA board has to say about that. This fence never should have been approved in the first place." I did not need HOA approval. It is on my property and it meets all city codes. "Everything in Riverside Meadows requires HOA approval," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I had heard her use at the monthly meetings. "Did you even read the CC and Articus when you bought your house?" I had read them, actually. All 73 pages of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The fence regulations only apply to fences visible from the street. This is a backyard fence that borders the common area. There is nothing in the CC and Articus about it. Helen's face was reddening, and not from the cold. "I am the HOA president, Nathan. I think I know the rules better than you do. Expect a formal letter from the board. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to document this incident." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of her damaged SUV and my fence. I stood there, incredulous, as she walked around in a circle, photographing everything from multiple angles. She did not take a single picture that showed how her vehicle had clearly slid off the road and into my property. "Helen, we need to exchange insurance information," I said firmly. "I will have my insurance company contact you," she said without looking up from her phone. "But I am telling you right now, Nathan, this fence is coming down. It is a safety hazard, and the HOA will not tolerate structures that endanger our community members. You crashed into it during a snowstorm because you were driving too fast for conditions," I said, my patience wearing thin. "That does not make it a safety hazard." She finally lowered her phone and fixed me with a cold stare. "We will let the board decide that. Meeting is next Wednesday at 7. I suggest you attend." With that, she climbed back into her SUV, somehow managed to back it off the remains of my fence with a grinding of metal and wood, and slowly drove away down the snow-covered street. I watched her taillights disappear into the white curtain of falling snow, then turned to survey the damage. About 15 feet of my fence was completely destroyed. The posts had been snapped off at the base, and the panels were crushed under tire tracks. The concrete footings were still intact at least, but the wood was ruined. I pulled out my phone and took my own set of photographs, making sure to capture the tire tracks leading from the road, across the slight shoulder, and directly into my fence. Back inside, I stripped off my wet clothes and made myself another cup of coffee while I thought about what to do. I had Helen's insurance information from the HOA directory, so I found my own insurance agent's number and gave them a call. After explaining the situation to a very sympathetic woman named Denise, she told me to file a police report for the property damage and that she would start a claim on my end as well. The Boulder Police Department was not thrilled about sending someone out in the middle of a snowstorm for a property damage accident with no injuries, but they eventually sent an officer about 3 hours later. Officer Rodriguez was a stocky man in his 30s who looked tired and cold. He took my statement, examined the damage and the tire tracks, which were already filling with new snow, and made notes on his tablet. "Did the other driver admit fault?" he asked. "Not exactly," I said. "She actually blamed the fence and said she is going to try to make me remove it through the HOA. Officer Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. "That is a new one. Well, it is pretty clear from the evidence what happened. She left the road and struck your fence. I will note that in the report. The tire tracks show she came from the street, and there is no indication you were at fault in any way." "Thank you, officer. You should get that fence repaired or at least boarded up soon. With the common area right there, you do not want anyone or any animals wandering into your yard." I had not thought about that, but he was right. Even though the common area was just an open space with some walking paths and the creek, technically anyone could walk right into my backyard now. After Officer Rodriguez left, I spent the rest of the afternoon in the garage, cutting plywood panels and screwing them to the remaining fence posts to create a temporary barrier. It was not pretty, but it would work until I could get the fence properly repaired. That evening, I called Jessica to tell her what had happened. She was appropriately outraged on my behalf. "I never liked that woman," Jessica said. "Remember at the Halloween party when she told me that our kids' costumes were not appropriate for a community event?" "They were dressed as zombies," I said. "Pretty standard Halloween costumes." "Exactly. And now she crashes into our fence and tries to blame you. I am glad I am not there, because I would probably say something I would regret. I have a feeling this is going to get worse before it gets better, I said. I had no idea how right I was. The snowstorm finally cleared up by Friday, and the plows made their way through the subdivision. I spent Saturday calling fence contractors, but most were backed up with storm damage repairs. The earliest anyone could come out for an estimate was the following week. In the meantime, I received an email from Helen with the subject line, HOA violation notice. I opened it with a sense of dread. Dear Mr. Miller, it has come to the attention of the Riverside Meadows HOA board that an unpermitted fence structure has been erected on your property in violation of Article 7, Section 3 of the CC and Articles. Additionally, the temporary plywood barrier currently installed constitutes an eyesore and violates Article 4, Section 2, regarding property maintenance and aesthetic standards. You are hereby required to appear before the HOA board at the regular meeting on Wednesday, January 10th, at 7:00 p.m. to address these violations. Failure to appear may result in fines and further action. Respectfully, Helen Pritchard, HOA President. I read the email 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each read. She had not even mentioned the accident. Not one word about how her vehicle had destroyed my fence in the first place. Instead, she was claiming the fence itself was a violation, and that my temporary repair, which I had only done because of the damage she caused, was an eyesore. I spent the rest of the weekend researching Colorado HOA law and reading through my CC and Articles with a fine-toothed comb. Article 7, Section 3 did indeed cover fences, but the language was clear. It only applied to fences visible from any public street or common driveway. My backyard fence was not visible from the street at all. You would have to walk through the common area or into my backyard to even see it. Article 4, Section 2, was about maintaining properties and not allowing trash or debris to accumulate, but there was a reasonable exception for temporary repairs due to damage. I also discovered something interesting. According to Colorado revised statutes, HOAs were required to follow their own governing documents and could not arbitrarily enforce rules. They also could not fine homeowners without proper notice and a hearing, which they had to conduct fairly and in good faith. Armed with this information, I drafted a response email to Helen, keeping it professional but firm. Dear Miss Pritchard, thank you for your email regarding the fence on my property. However, I must respectfully dispute your characterization of the situation. The fence in question was installed in accordance with all city codes and regulations. It is located in my backyard and is not visible from any public street, and therefore does not require HOA approval per Article 7, Section 3 of the CC and Articles. The temporary plywood barrier was installed as an emergency repair after your vehicle crashed into and destroyed a portion of my fence during the snowstorm on January 3rd. This temporary repair is necessary for security and safety purposes until permanent repairs can be completed. I have filed a police report regarding the incident, report number 250104, and my insurance company is processing a claim. I expect your insurance company will be covering the costs of the permanent repairs. I will attend the meeting on Wednesday to address any questions the board may have. Sincerely, Nathan Miller. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then forwarded the entire email chain to my insurance agent, Denise, with a note asking if this was normal. She called me back within an hour. Nathan, I have been doing this for 15 years and I have never seen anything quite like this. Denise said. Our adjuster went out to look at the damage yesterday, and it is very clear that Miss Pritchard was at fault. Her insurance company has already accepted liability, and they have approved payment for your fence repairs. You should receive a check within a week. That is great news, I said. But what about this HOA thing? Can she actually make me remove the fence? I am not an HOA expert, but from what you have told me, it sounds like she is trying to intimidate you. You might want to consult with an attorney who specializes in HOA law, just to be safe. That was how I found myself sitting in the office of Michael Chen, attorney at law, on Tuesday afternoon. His office was in a modern building near downtown Boulder, with a view of the Flatirons through floor-to-ceiling windows. Michael was in his early 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of calm competence. He reviewed all my documents, the CC and Articus, the email exchanges, the police report, the photographs, and the insurance information. When he finally looked up, he was shaking his head. "This is harassment," he said flatly. "Miss Pritchard damaged your property, and now she is attempting to use her position as HOA president to intimidate you and potentially avoid responsibility. The fence clearly does not violate any HOA rules, and the temporary repair is reasonable under the circumstances. So what should I do?" I asked. "Go to the meeting tomorrow night. Stay calm, present your facts, and do not let her bully you. Bring copies of everything, the police report, the photographs, the relevant sections of the CC and Articus. If the board tries to fine you or force you to remove the fence, we will fight it. HOA boards have power, but they do not have unlimited power. They have to follow their own rules and state law." "What will this cost me?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I will be honest with you, Nathan. HOA disputes can get expensive if they drag on. But in this case, the facts are so clearly in your favor that I do not think it will come to that. If it does, you may be able to recover your attorney fees. Colorado law allows for that in cases where an HOA acted in bad faith or exceeded its authority." I left his office feeling slightly better, but still anxious about the meeting. I spent Tuesday evening preparing, printing out documents, and organizing everything in a folder. I even practiced what I was going to say, trying to keep it factual and unemotional. Wednesday evening came too quickly. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the subdivision entrance that also housed a gym and a party room. I arrived at 6:45, wanting to be early but not too early. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs for residents. Helen was already there, of course, sitting in the center chair at the board table. The other 4 board members were there as well. Tom Erickson, the vice president who owned a dental practice. Sarah Kowalski, the treasurer who was a retired accountant. Michael Brennan, the secretary who worked in real estate. And Jennifer Young, a member-at-large who was a stay-at-home mom. I had met all of them briefly at various community events, but I did not know any of them well. A few other residents trickled in, probably there for other agenda items or just out of curiosity. I took a seat in the 3rd row, my folder on my lap, and waited. Helen called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. They went through the standard opening procedures: roll call, approval of the previous meeting minutes, financial report. Sarah gave an update on the HOA accounts, which were apparently healthy. There was a discussion about snow removal costs, which had been higher than budgeted due to the recent storm. Then Helen cleared her throat and looked directly at me. "Next on the agenda is a violation issue regarding 847 Willow Creek Drive, the property owned by Nathan Miller. Mr. Miller, would you please come forward?" I stood and walked to the front of the room, very aware of the other residents watching. I kept my expression neutral and my folder tucked under my arm. "Mr. Miller, as you are aware, you have installed a fence on your property without HOA approval," Helen began. "This violates our CC and RTCS. Additionally, you have now erected a plywood barrier that is not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of our community. The board would like to hear your explanation." I took a breath and opened my folder. "Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. First, I would like to clarify the facts. The cedar fence in question was installed 3 months ago in my backyard. It is not visible from any public street. According to Article 7, Section 3 of our CC and RTCS, HOA approval is only required for fences visible from public streets or common driveways. I have a copy of that section here if the board would like to review it." I held up the page, and Michael Brennan gestured for it. I handed it to him, and he read it quickly, then passed it to the other board members. "The fence was installed to code with proper permits from the city," I continued. "I have documentation of that as well. It is set back a full foot from my property line, and it borders the common area along Willow Creek. The temporary plywood barrier that is currently in place was installed as an emergency repair after the fence was damaged during last week's snowstorm." "Damaged how?" Tom Erickson asked, looking genuinely curious. "A vehicle struck the fence during the storm and destroyed approximately 15 feet of it," I said carefully. "I installed the plywood barrier to secure my property until permanent repairs could be made. I have hired a contractor, and the repairs will be completed next week." Helen's face had gone tight. "Mr. Miller is being deliberately vague. The vehicle that allegedly struck his fence was mine, and I maintain that the fence is poorly positioned and creates a safety hazard." "There is nothing alleged about it," I said, my voice still calm. "I filed a police report, which I have here. Officer Rodriguez documented the incident, including photographs of the tire tracks and the damage. Your insurance company has accepted liability and is paying for the repairs." I handed a copy of the police report to Michael Brennan, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. He read it and passed it along. "Helen, did you not mention any of this to the rest of us?" Sarah Kowalski asked, frowning. "I did not think it was relevant to the violation issue," Helen said stiffly. "The fact remains that the fence should not be there in the first place. But according to the CC and RTCS, Nathan is right," Michael Brennan said, holding up the page I had given him. "It says approval is only required for fences visible from public streets. His fence is in the backyard." "The intent of the rule is to cover all fences," Helen insisted. "We need to maintain control over what homeowners build on their properties." "That is not what the rule says, though," Jennifer Young pointed out. "If the rule was meant to cover all fences, it would say that." I could see Helen's frustration growing, but I kept my expression neutral. Tom Erickson spoke up. "Helen, I think we need to be realistic here. Nathan's fence is legal. It was built to code, and it does not violate our CC and RTCS as written. The fact that you accidentally hit it during a snowstorm does not change that." "It was not an accident," Helen snapped. "The fence created a blind spot that made it impossible to see properly. With all due respect, Miss Pritchard, the police report indicates that you left the road and struck a fence that is set back several feet from the road," I said. "The visibility issue was due to the snowstorm, not the fence." The room was silent for a moment. Then Sarah Kowalski spoke up. "I move that we find Nathan's fence to be in compliance with our CC and RTCS and dismiss this violation." "I second that," Tom Erickson said immediately. Helen looked furious. "I am the president of this board, and I am telling you this fence is a problem. And we appreciate your concerns," Tom said diplomatically. "But the board needs to follow the rules as written." All in favor of dismissing the violation, 4 hands went up: Tom, Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer. Helen did not raise her hand. "The motion passes," Tom said. "Nathan, you are free to repair your fence. We apologize for the confusion." "Wait," Helen said sharply. "This is not over. I am calling for an emergency amendment to Article 7 to clarify that all fences require approval." "That would need to be voted on by the homeowners, not just the board," Sarah said wearily. "And it would not be retroactive anyway." I could have left it there. I could have thanked the board and walked away. But something in Helen's expression, the entitled fury that she was not getting her way, made me speak up. "There is one more thing," I said. "Miss Pritchard sent me a violation notice before this meeting, threatening fines if I did not comply. Given that the board has now found no violation, I would like to request that a formal note be placed in my homeowner file indicating that my fence is in full compliance with all HOA rules. I want to make sure there are no further attempts to claim I am in violation." "That is completely reasonable," Michael Brennan said, making a note. "I will send you a letter confirming the board's decision." "This is ridiculous," Helen said, standing up abruptly. "The board is supposed to support the president, not undermine her authority." "The board is supposed to follow the rules fairly," Tom said quietly. "That is what we are doing." Helen grabbed her papers and purse and stormed out of the meeting room, the door slamming behind her. The remaining board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I apologize for that," Tom said to me and the other residents present. "This was not handled appropriately from the beginning." "Thank you for your time," I said, gathering my folder. "I appreciate the board's fairness." I drove home feeling victorious but also uneasy. I had embarrassed Helen in front of the entire board and several residents. Based on what I had seen of her personality over the past 8 months, I doubted she was going to let this go easily. I was right. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from Helen, but this time she was not writing as HOA president. The letter was from Pritchard Legal Services and informed me that Helen was filing a personal lawsuit against me for creating a hazardous condition that had resulted in damage to her vehicle. She was seeking $15,000 in damages for the vehicle repairs, medical expenses for trauma and stress, and punitive damages for my reckless disregard for community safety. I sat in my kitchen, reading the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure spike. She was actually suing me. After she crashed into my fence, after her insurance had already accepted liability, after the board had ruled in my favor, she was suing me personally. I called Michael Chen immediately. He told me to bring the letter to his office that afternoon. When I arrived, he read it and actually laughed. "This is absurd," he said. "Her own insurance company accepted liability. The police report clearly shows she was at fault. She does not have a case. Can she do this, though? Just sue me for whatever she wants. Anyone can file a lawsuit, Nathan. That does not mean they will win. This is harassment, plain and simple. She is trying to intimidate you and punish you for standing up to her at the HOA meeting. We will respond to this, and I will also recommend that you file a counterclaim for malicious prosecution. Will this cost me a lot of money? It might. But I suspect that once we respond strongly and make it clear we are not backing down, she will drop it. People like Helen Pritchard are bullies. They are used to people rolling over and giving them what they want. When someone fights back, they usually fold." I left Michael's office feeling slightly better, but the stress was building. Jessica was due home with the kids in 2 days, and I did not want to dump all of this on her the moment she walked through the door. The fence contractor had finally been out for an estimate, and had given me a quote of $4,200 for the repairs, which was more than the original fence had cost. Helen's insurance company was willing to pay $3,800, claiming depreciation on the original fence. I was going to have to fight them on that too. That weekend was tense. I tried to focus on getting the house ready for Jessica and the kids to come home, but the lawsuit hung over everything. I told Jessica about it when she called Saturday night, and she was predictably furious. "That woman is insane," Jessica said. "She crashes into your fence and now she is suing you. Can we countersue her?" "My attorney says we can and probably will," I said, "but it is going to be a headache. We are not letting her get away with this, Nathan. We are going to fight her every step of the way." Jessica came home Sunday afternoon with our kids, Emma and Oliver. Emma was 8 and Oliver was 6, and they were full of stories about their time at Grandma and Grandpa's house in Phoenix. I helped unload the car and listened to their excited chatter, trying to push the HOA drama out of my mind for a few hours. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat down with Jessica and told her everything that had happened. She listened quietly, her expression growing more furious by the minute. "We need to go on the offensive," Jessica said when I finished. "This woman is abusing her power as HOA president and she is harassing us. Who can we report her to?" "I am not sure there is anyone," I said. "The HOA board already ruled against her, but she is still president. Can they remove her as president? I do not know. I would have to check the bylaws." We spent the next hour digging through the HOA governing documents online. It turned out that the president could be removed by a vote of the board or by a recall vote of the homeowners. The board removal required 4 out of 5 members to vote for it. A recall required signatures from 20% of homeowners, followed by a special election. 4 out of 5 board members, Jessica said thoughtfully. At the last meeting, 4 of them voted against her. Do you think they would vote to remove her? I do not know them well enough to say. Tom Erickson seemed reasonable, and so did Sarah Kowalski. But asking them to remove the president is a big step. What about talking to other neighbors? Has Helen done this to anyone else? That was a good question. Over the next few days, I started having casual conversations with neighbors when I saw them outside. I was careful not to badmouth Helen directly, but I would mention the fence incident and see how people reacted. The reactions were telling. Out of the 10 neighbors I spoke with, 7 had stories about Helen abusing her power as HOA president. The Johnsons 2 doors down had been fined $300 for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, even though the CC and Articus allowed it. The Patels across the street had been threatened with legal action for painting their front door navy blue instead of the approved black or brown. The Sullivans at the end of the block had been told they could not plant a vegetable garden in their backyard because it was unsightly. Even though their backyard was completely fenced and not visible to anyone. The more stories I heard, the angrier I got. Helen was not just targeting me. She had been bullying the entire neighborhood for months, possibly longer. I started to wonder how she had become HOA president in the first place. Tom Erickson provided that answer when I ran into him at the grocery store on Wednesday. We chatted briefly about the weather and the snow removal, and then I asked him as casually as I could how long Helen had been president. "About 2 years, Tom said with a sigh. "She ran unopposed, actually. No one else wanted the job. It is a lot of work for no pay, and most people do not want the hassle. I think a lot of us are regretting that now." "She seems very passionate about the rules," I said diplomatically. Tom snorted. "That is one way to put it." "Look, Nathan, I probably should not say this, but a few of us on the board are getting fed up with her. The fence thing was ridiculous, and it is not the first time she has tried to use her position to push a personal agenda. We are supposed to serve the community, not our own interests. Is there anything that can be done? Tom looked around as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Between you and me, Sarah and Michael and I have been talking about it. Jennifer is on the fence, no pun intended. We would need all four of us to vote to remove Helen, and we are not sure Jennifer will go for it. She does not like conflict. Would it help if you knew other homeowners who had issues with Helen? It might. If we could show a pattern of abuse of power, it would make the decision easier. But we would need to be careful. If we try to remove her and fail, things could get even worse. I thanked Tom for his time and finished my shopping, my mind racing. When I got home, I talked it over with Jessica. We should organize the neighbors, Jessica said firmly. Get everyone who has been harassed by Helen to document their experiences. Then present it to the board as evidence that she is not fit to be president. That could take weeks, I said, and in the meantime she is suing us. Then we fight on both fronts. We deal with the lawsuit through your attorney, and we work on getting her removed from the board through the proper channels. It was a good plan, but I was exhausted just thinking about it. Still, Jessica was right. If we did not stand up to Helen, she would just keep doing this to us and to other people. Over the next 2 weeks, Jessica and I worked with several neighbors to document Helen's pattern of behavior. We were careful to stick to facts, dates, specific incidents, copies of violation notices, and emails. We did not editorialize or make accusations. We just presented the evidence. The Johnsons, the Patels, the Sullivans, and 6 other families agreed to submit statements. Meanwhile, Michael Chen had responded to Helen's lawsuit with a strong motion to dismiss, arguing that the suit was frivolous and filed in bad faith. He also filed a counterclaim on my behalf, seeking damages for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I did not know if we would win, but it felt good to fight back. The fence contractor finally started work on the repairs in late January. The weather had cleared up, and they were able to remove the damaged sections and install new panels. It took 3 days, but when they were finished, the fence looked even better than before. Helen's insurance company eventually agreed to pay the full amount after Michael Chen sent them a strongly worded letter. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for February 7th. Jessica and I prepared carefully, organizing all the documentation and reaching out to the affected neighbors to see if they would attend. 8 families confirmed they would be there. The night of the meeting, the community center room was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Every chair was filled, and a few people were standing in the back. Helen looked surprised when she walked in and saw the turnout, but she quickly composed herself and took her seat at the board table. Tom Erickson called the meeting to order, and they went through the usual preliminary business. Then Tom cleared his throat and looked at Helen. Before we move to the regular agenda, we have a special matter to address, Tom said. Several homeowners have come forward with concerns about how the HOA is being run, specifically regarding the enforcement of rules and the conduct of the president. We are going to give everyone a chance to speak, and then the board will discuss the matter. Helen's face went pale, then flushed red. This is highly irregular. You did not inform me that this would be on the agenda. It is an emergency matter, Sarah Kowalski said quietly. We only finalized the decision to address it this afternoon. I am the president, Helen said, her voice rising. You cannot just ambush me like this. We are not ambushing you, Michael Brennan said. We are allowing homeowners to voice their concerns, which is part of our responsibility as a board. You will have a chance to respond. Tom looked out at the crowd. Who would like to speak first? I stood up, my folder in hand. I will. I walked to the front and laid out the entire fence situation, from the accident to the violation notice to the lawsuit. I kept my tone factual and showed the documentation, the police report, the insurance correspondence, the violation notice, the lawsuit. When I finished, several people in the audience nodded in agreement. Then John Sullivan stood up and told his story about being prohibited from planting a vegetable garden. Then Priya Patel talked about the front door paint issue. Then Amy Johnson described being fined for the basketball hoop. One by one, 8 different families stood up and shared their experiences. The stories painted a clear picture. Helen had been using her position as HOA president to enforce petty, arbitrary rules and to punish anyone who disagreed with her. Through it all, Helen sat at the board table, her face growing redder and her expression more furious. When the last homeowner finished speaking, Tom looked at Helen. "Would you like to respond to any of these concerns?" Helen stood up and her voice was shaking with anger. "This is a witch hunt. You are all ganging up on me because I actually care about maintaining standards in this community. Every single thing I have done has been to protect our property values and keep Riverside Meadows a desirable place to live. If that means enforcing rules that some people find inconvenient, so be it. I am not going to apologize for doing my job." "Your job is not to harass homeowners," Sarah Kowalski said quietly. "Your job is to serve the community fairly and follow the governing documents. Based on what we have heard tonight, you have not been doing that." "I have been following the rules," Helen insisted. "Just because people do not like the rules does not mean I am wrong to enforce them. You fine the Johnsons for having a basketball hoop, but the CC and Articus allow basketball hoops," Tom pointed out. "You tried to force Nathan to remove a fence that was in full compliance with the rules. You threatened the Patels over a front door color that was not even addressed in the CC and Articus. These are not cases of enforcing rules. These are cases of making up rules to suit your personal preferences. And now you are suing a homeowner in your personal capacity after your insurance company already accepted liability for an accident you caused," Michael Brennan added. "That is an abuse of your position, Helen." "My personal legal actions are none of the HOA's business," Helen snapped. "They are when you are using your position as HOA president to intimidate the person you are suing," Sarah said. "That is exactly what you did with the violation notice." Helen looked around the table and seemed to realize she was losing. "Fine. If you do not appreciate everything I have done for this community, then maybe you should find someone else to do the job. I resign." She grabbed her purse and papers and stormed toward the door, but Tom's voice stopped her. "Hold on, Helen. We are not done yet." She turned back, her expression wary. Tom looked at the other board members and some silent communication passed between them. Then he looked at Helen. "The board has discussed this matter, and we believe your conduct goes beyond just poor judgment. Based on the evidence presented tonight, we believe you have been abusing your position as president and potentially violating your fiduciary duty to the HOA. Before you resign, we need to conduct a full review of your actions as president, including a financial audit to make sure there have not been any other irregularities." Helen's face went white. "A financial audit? Are you accusing me of stealing?" "We are not accusing you of anything," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "But given the pattern of behavior we have seen, we have a responsibility to make sure everything is in order. It is standard procedure when a board member leaves under these circumstances." "This is outrageous," Helen said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "I have done nothing wrong with the finances." "Then an audit will confirm that and we can all move forward," Tom said. "Sarah, as treasurer, can you arrange for an independent audit?" "I can have someone start next week," Sarah confirmed. Helen stood there for a moment, looking like she wanted to say something else, but then she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a decisive click. The room was silent for a moment, and then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Tom held up his hands. "Let us not celebrate yet," he said. "We have a lot of work to do to repair the damage and restore trust in the HOA, but I want to thank everyone who came forward tonight. It took courage, and it is going to make a real difference." The meeting continued with regular business, but the atmosphere was completely different. People were relaxed, even cheerful. Several neighbors came up to me afterward to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Helen. Jessica, who had been sitting in the back, came up and hugged me. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected her. This was a team effort. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Sarah Kowalski hired an independent auditor to review the HOA finances. The board held a special election to choose a new president, and Tom Erickson was elected unanimously. He immediately set about reforming how the HOA operated, creating clearer procedures for enforcement and a homeowner appeals process. The audit results came back in early March, and they were damning. Helen had not been embezzling money exactly, but she had been using HOA funds inappropriately. She had charged several personal expenses to the HOA credit card, including dinners at expensive restaurants. A new laptop that she claimed was for HOA business but had never been used for that purpose. And even a weekend trip to Vail that she had described as a conference, but was actually just a ski vacation. In total, she had misused about $8,000 in HOA funds over 2 years. Tom called an emergency board meeting and invited Helen to explain. She did not show up. Instead, her husband called and said Helen was too stressed to attend and that they would be paying back the money immediately. A check for $8,000 arrived at the HOA within a week, along with a formal letter of resignation from Helen as HOA president, vice president, and board member. The board accepted her resignation and agreed not to pursue criminal charges, provided the money was repaid in full, and Helen agreed never to serve on the HOA board again. It was a generous resolution, given what she had done. Around the same time, Michael Chen called with good news about the lawsuit. Helen had filed a motion to dismiss her own lawsuit against me, admitting that she no longer wished to pursue the matter. Michael had agreed to dismiss my counter-claim in exchange, with the provision that Helen pay my attorney fees, which totaled about $6,000. She agreed without argument. "She is cutting her losses," Michael explained. "With the HOA audit and her resignation, she knows she does not have a leg to stand on. If this went to court, she would lose, and it would cost her a lot more than $6,000. "So it is really over?" I asked. "It is really over. You won, Nathan." It did not feel like winning exactly. It felt more like surviving. But as the weeks went by and life in Riverside Meadows returned to normal, I started to feel a sense of relief. The new fence looked great and my backyard was secure again. The HOA board under Tom's leadership was reasonable and fair, actually working to serve the community instead of bully it. Helen and her husband listed their house for sale in April. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were moving to Grand Junction to be closer to her family. Part of me felt bad for her. She had clearly been unhappy and had taken it out on everyone around her. But mostly, I was just glad she was leaving. The house sold quickly, and a young couple with a toddler moved in. They introduced themselves to the neighbors with a friendly wave and a plate of homemade cookies. It was a refreshing change. One Saturday in May, Jessica and I were working in the garden when Tom Erickson stopped by. He was out for a walk and wanted to chat. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did," Tom said. "If you had not stood up to Helen, she would probably still be running the HOA into the ground." "I was just defending my fence," I said with a laugh. "It was more than that," Tom said seriously. "You showed everyone that it was okay to push back against unfairness. A lot of people in this neighborhood were scared of Helen, and you broke that spell. The HOA is functioning better now than it has in years." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I am happy to go back to being a quiet homeowner who just maintains his property and minds his own business." Tom laughed. "Fair enough. But if you ever want to get more involved, we could use someone like you on the board. We have an opening now that Helen is gone." I looked at Jessica, who gave me a look that clearly said, "Absolutely not." I turned back to Tom. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I will pass. I have had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime." "I completely understand," Tom said, "but the offer stands if you change your mind." After Tom left, Jessica and I went back to our gardening. Oliver was playing on the swing set in the backyard, and Emma was reading a book on the patio. The fence stood solid and secure around the property, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, providing privacy and security for my family. I thought about everything that had happened since that snowy morning in January, when I had watched Helen's SUV crash through my fence. It had been stressful and expensive and time-consuming, but in the end, it had brought the neighborhood together. People were more willing to speak up now, more willing to hold the HOA accountable. That was a good thing. As summer approached, life in Riverside Meadows settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was functional and fair, focused on maintaining common areas and handling legitimate issues rather than manufacturing problems. Tom had even organized a neighborhood barbecue in June, which was surprisingly well attended. People who had barely spoken to each other before were now friendly, united by the shared experience of surviving Helen's reign. I ran into Sarah Kowalski at the barbecue, and she pulled me aside with a smile. "I wanted to let you know that we have made some changes to the CC and Artiques," she said. We clarified several sections that were vague or potentially problematic, including the fence regulations. Everything is much clearer now, and we have added language about the appeals process and homeowner rights. "That is great to hear," I said. "I hope it prevents future issues." "It should," Sarah agreed. "And we have also implemented quarterly financial reports that are sent to all homeowners. Complete transparency. No one wants a repeat of the Helen situation." The changes were reassuring. It felt like the HOA was actually learning from what had happened, rather than just sweeping it under the rug and moving on. In July, I was working from home when I noticed a moving truck pull up to Helen's old house. The new owners, David and Melissa Hartman, were moving in with their daughter Sophie, who was 3 years old. I walked over to introduce myself and offer to help, and David gratefully accepted. Several other neighbors showed up as well, and we made a party of it, carrying boxes and furniture while Sophie played in the yard. "Everyone has been so welcoming," Melissa said, looking genuinely touched. "When we were house hunting, we were worried about HOAs. We had heard horror stories. But everyone here seems really nice." "The HOA has had some changes recently," I said diplomatically. "It is under new management, and things are running much better now." "We noticed the reviews online were mixed," David said. "But our realtor said there had been some turnover on the board and things had improved." "That is accurate," I confirmed. "If you have any questions or concerns, Tom Erickson is the new president, and he is very approachable." Over the following months, I watched the Hartmans settle into the neighborhood. Sophie became fast friends with Oliver and Emma, and Jessica and Melissa started a book club with a few other moms in the subdivision. It felt like the neighborhood had a new energy, a new sense of community that had been missing before. In September, I received a letter from Michael Chen's office. It was a formal notice that Helen Pritchard's lawsuit had been officially dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could not refile it, and that the payment of my attorney fees had been received in full. Attached was a check from Helen's insurance company for the remaining disputed amount on the fence repairs. With that final payment, the entire incident was financially resolved. I showed the letter to Jessica that evening, and she raised her glass of wine in a toast. "To standing up to bullies," she said. "To standing up to bullies," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. That October, the HOA held its annual meeting to elect board members for the coming year. Tom Erickson was re-elected as president, and Sarah Kowalski remained as treasurer. Michael Brennan decided to step down as secretary, and a newcomer to the neighborhood, an engineer named Robert Vasquez, was elected to take his place. Jennifer Young remained as a member at large, but she seemed more engaged now, less afraid to voice her opinions. The meeting was efficient and professional. Tom presented a report on the year's activities, including the audit findings and the reforms that had been implemented. There was a moment of awkwardness when he briefly mentioned Helen's resignation, but he handled it tactfully, focusing on the lessons learned rather than assigning blame. "We have worked hard to restore trust and transparency in the HOA," Tom said, "but our work is not done. We need to continue listening to homeowners, following our governing documents, and serving the community fairly. That is what an HOA should be, a tool to help maintain our neighborhood, not a weapon to control people." The room applauded, and I felt a surge of pride in how far the community had come. As winter approached again, I found myself standing at the same kitchen window where I had watched Helen crash into my fence nearly a year ago. The fence was solid and secure, the wood weathered slightly but still strong. Snow was beginning to fall, the first real storm of the season, and I watched the flakes drift down peacefully. Emma and Oliver were doing homework at the kitchen table, and Jessica was making dinner. The house was warm and filled with the sounds of family life. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the streets empty as people stayed inside to avoid the snow. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Erickson. "Snow removal team is on standby. Should have roads cleared by morning. Stay safe, everyone." It was a simple message, but it represented everything that had changed. The HOA was now a helpful presence, not an oppressive one. Tom and the board were focused on actual community needs, not petty power plays. I thought about Helen sometimes, wondered if she was happy in Grand Junction, if she had learned anything from the experience. I hoped she had, but I also knew that some people never change. The important thing was that she was no longer in a position to hurt people with her need for control. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my thoughts. I opened it to find Tom standing there with a plate of cookies. "Linda made too many," he said with a grin, referring to his wife. "We are sharing the wealth with the neighbors." "Thanks," I said, taking the plate. "Want to come in for a minute?" "Just for a minute," Tom said, stepping inside and stomping the snow off his boots. "I wanted to check in with you, make sure everything is good." "Everything is great," I said honestly. "The fence is holding up well, the HOA is running smoothly, and I am happy to be boring again." Tom laughed. "Boring is underrated. I have been doing this job for almost a year now, and I have a new appreciation for how difficult it is to keep everyone happy. But I think we are doing okay." "You are doing more than okay," I said. "You have completely turned things around." "It was a team effort," Tom said. "And it started with you refusing to be pushed around. That set the tone for everything that followed. After Tom left, I returned to the window and watched the snow continue to fall. The fence stood solid in the backyard, a testament to standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. It was just a fence, 6 feet of cedar planks and posts, but it had become a symbol of something larger, the importance of pushing back against injustice, even in small, suburban ways. Jessica came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just reflecting on the past year," I said. "It has been quite a ride." "It has," she agreed, "but we made it through and we are stronger for it." She was right. The experience with Helen and the HOA had been stressful and exhausting, but it had also brought Jessica and me closer together. It had connected us with our neighbors in meaningful ways. It had taught me that standing up for yourself was not just about winning. It was about principle and community and refusing to let bullies have their way. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the neighborhood in white. Inside our warm house, with my family around me and my fence standing secure in the backyard, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The battle with HOA Karen was over, and life had returned to the peaceful, ordinary rhythm I had always wanted. In the end, it was not about the fence at all. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. It was about community and fairness and refusing to let one person's need for control destroy something good. Helen had crashed into my fence during a snowstorm and demanded I remove it entirely. But in doing so, she had set in motion events that removed her from power instead. The fence remained, a silent guardian of my property and a reminder that sometimes the smallest stands against injustice can lead to the biggest changes. As I stood there with Jessica, watching the snow fall and listening to our kids laugh in the next room, I knew that everything had turned out exactly as it should. The neighborhood was better. The HOA was better. And I had learned that sometimes you have to fight for your fence, because it is never really just about the fence at all.